Welcome to the Peak of Geek, where we've hit the top, but with no plans to stop. Okay, I have a confession to make. I kind of miss the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I know what you're saying, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or the MCU, didn't go anywhere. It's still here, and it's still going strong. As of the posting of this video, The Marvels has just hit theaters in the last year, and the new Echo series dropped on Disney Plus pretty recently. And I know that, but I just don't care anymore. This used to be such a huge part of my life, but it's since gone and left me behind. But I keep wondering, where did it all go so wrong? Let's take a few steps back so we can try to find some perspective and figure out how we even got here in the first place. Back in 2008, many of us had hit our respective limits when it came to superhero films. After the overwhelming financial and critical success of Sam Raimi's first two Spider-Man movies starring Tobey Maguire, Raimi was allegedly pressured to make a third movie to release in 2007. To make matters even worse, he was more or less forced to include Venom as a villain, while Raimi was way more interested in exploring the tragic backstory of the Sandman. So why not add both? And while we're at it, let's bring back James Franco as the new Green Goblin. It definitely won't be an overcrowded, confusing mess. Over the years, people have laughed at and even somewhat embraced this weird film, with its questionable, baffling moments. But at the time, it was just disappointing. But there was a light at the end of the tunnel for Caped Crusader fans. A few months after the debacle that was Spider-Man 3, fans would get to watch a now infamous trailer for Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. This sequel to Batman Begins, Nolan's origin story for Bruce Wayne that served as a more serious take following the franchise started by Tim Burton in 1989, The Dark Knight blew fans away with Heath Ledger's jaw-dropping posthumous performance as the Clown Prince of Crime. And while The Dark Knight was an incredible film, and it really is, it deserves all the praise it gets, it's so much more than a superhero movie. This was a Christopher Nolan film, a supremely well-crafted, Hans Zimmer composed special effects extravaganza. But 1 month before The Dark Knight would hit theaters, another completely different superhero would grace the big screens. And in stark contrast to Batman, this one would star a character that most non-comic book readers probably wouldn't even recognize. Iron Man. Believe it or not, this was a movie 18 years in the making, and during its tumultuous development, it seems just about everyone in Hollywood was involved at some point or other, including Quentin Tarantino, Tom Cruise, Nicolas Cage, and even Joss Whedon, who would go on to write and direct the Avengers follow-up a few years later. Ultimately, the role of director went to Jon Favreau, who had recently helmed the holiday-themed box office smash Elf with Will Ferrell. For the role of playboy philanthropist, Favreau brilliantly cast Robert Downey Jr., whose real-life struggles mirrored that of Tony Stark, Iron Man's billionaire alter ego. Iron Man successfully elevates itself beyond a generic summertime blockbuster popcorn flick by giving audiences an atypical superhero origin story that also acts as a satisfying character redemption arc. Unlike Nolan's serious take on Batman, this first Iron Man film balanced its serious moments with lighthearted ones to create a cinematic experience that truly felt like a comic book translated to the screen. And the story told here only works as well as it does thanks to the fantastic performance given by Robert Downey Jr. While RDJ primarily dealt with personal struggles during the mid to late 90s, he was in the process of a major comeback before he found major blockbuster success with Iron Man. And when you combine his strong performance with a couple Marvel cameos and name drops, including mentions of Intelligence Agency S.H.I.E.L.D. with new character Phil Coulson, and a now legendary post-credits sequence with Samuel L. Jackson's Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D., teasing the existence of other superheroes and name-dropping the Avengers Initiative, you have a movie that made a lot of people stand up and take notice. Ambitious? Yes. And what a way to set up another film. A mere month later, another Marvel superhero would hit the big screens. And when looking back at The Incredible Hulk, I do wonder if Iron Man was thrown in there at the last minute. While the original script featured references to S.H.I.E.L.D., those were removed before filming, and the only real tie to the previous month's movie was a small uncredited cameo of Tony Stark to tell him a team is being put together. And that's really the only reference to a forthcoming universe that was still clearly in the planning stages. Well, sort of.
Nearly 10 years later, Martin Starr would appear as Peter Parker's teacher in 2017's Spider-Man Homecoming, and reprise that role in the next two Spider-Man movies. But some of you may not know that he also appeared in The Incredible Hulk as an uncredited character. But it's since been said it's the same guy. Wow, they had that much foresight? No, they just kind of retroactively did that.
The Incredible Hulk wasn't as much of a critical or financial success when compared to Iron Man, and it has since been relegated as the black sheep of the early Marvel Cinematic Universe days, mostly due to Marvel's behind-the-scenes decision to remove Ed Norton due to creative differences.
But 2 years later, Tony Stark would hit theaters once more in Iron Man 2, a somewhat uneven film that continued to flesh out the Marvel world while introducing 3 new superheroes to audiences. Well, kind of. You got Natasha Romanoff, aka the Black Widow, you've got Rhodey in the War Machine gear, and the post-credits tease for Thor, even though we don't actually see him yet. 1 year later, we would get another double feature spread across May and July, the previously teased debut of Thor and Captain America: The First Avenger. These movies would round out the rest of the eventual Avengers team while simultaneously introducing the Tesseract MacGuffin and Loki, the Trickster God. Both Thor and Captain America performed well. I think it's fair to say most audiences were now tuned in and ready for what these movies had all been building towards.
While Iron Man and The Incredible Hulk had included a few sneaky references that could have been interpreted as fun in-jokes for comic book fans, now it was getting serious. The Avengers were coming. And in May of 2012, movie fans and comic book fans alike would walk into a theater to witness franchise history in the making.
It's hard to get across how exciting this movie was unless you were there on opening day. I went with a group of friends in cosplay, and I was appointed to be Hawkeye, and I think I nailed it. For the comic book fans out there, yes, I was going for a Matt Fraction Hawkeye look, and I know, I look incredible.
I distinctly remember sitting down in the movie theater, and this moment of realization kind of came over me. This was a major cinematic event. I can't think of another movie watching experience that has since compared.
I'm sure that mega fans walking into the theater to see Star Wars or Lord of the Rings had similar vibes. That feeling of being in a dark theater with your mouth wide open, barely able to sit still because you're so gobsmacked by what you're seeing happen on the screen. To me, it felt like the perfect superhero movie, in the way it managed to bring in a wide audience of movie fans while paying tribute to the characters fans had grown up reading about for decades. I ended up going back to the theater 2 more times to watch The Avengers again. The light-hearted rapid-fire quips, combined with a handful of satisfying action sequences, with rootable characters and incredible moments, all combined to create a consistently entertaining film from beginning to end. Sure, one could say that this stylistic approach to the Avengers would eventually become formulaic and a little predictable, but in those early days, it felt fresh and fun. And that end credits reference to Thanos? The perfect cherry on the cake.
The Avengers would go on to gross over $1.5 billion at the box office, and it currently sits as the 10th most profitable movie in history. It also found similar success critically, so it's no surprise that the Marvel Cinematic Universe was here to stay. And like so many others, I could not wait to find out what would happen next.
Soon after release, the Avengers and the 5 films that came before would become known as Phase 1, and that Phase 2 would begin the very next year. For the next 4 years, audiences would be treated to 2 MCU films per year, and this second phase would introduce everyone to the Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man, among others. Of course, an Avengers sequel would follow shortly thereafter with Avengers: Age of Ultron, that saw the original gang get back together while introducing 3 more heroes with Quicksilver, the Scarlet Witch, and Vision.
For many, myself included, this second phase gave us some of the best films in the entire MCU. Mainly Captain America: Winter Soldier and Guardians of the Galaxy.
The Winter Soldier expertly adapted the comic book storyline of the same name that sees Captain America's former partner Bucky Barnes, once thought dead before Cap went into the ice, returning as a brainwashed assassin. This superhero film once again elevated beyond its blockbuster stereotypes to create a multi-genre, genuinely suspenseful political thriller that happened to be about costumed heroes. And later that same year, Marvel would release yet another team-up film featuring a group of heroes that couldn't be more different than the Avengers. Peter Quill and his group of strange alien creatures that would eventually become friends end up saving the universe in a film that almost seemed destined to fail with how weird it was, but ended up winning us all over with its trademark Marvel humor and more than a few surprisingly heartfelt moments that still makes this one stand out from the rest. And of course, those 80s pop songs tied it all together.
Unlike the first phase of films that eventually led to The Avengers, a fan favorite classic, this one led to a somewhat lackluster sequel with Avengers Age of Ultron, and then wrapped the whole thing up with Ant-Man, a somewhat lighthearted and safe film that gets a pass from most due to Paul Rudd's charming performance as Scott Lang.
But that Avengers sequel, Age of Ultron, left a bad taste in many people's mouths, myself included. The first Avengers movie was a bit of a novelty paired with a dream come true for comic book fans. But it can't be overstated how well it balances all the characters. Each hero gets their own moment to shine, and the movie itself flows with an effortless pace that keeps you invested until the end. Age of Ultron, on the other hand, does end up feeling a bit too overcrowded, with the introduction of 3 new heroes and a villain that somehow ends up feeling a bit forgettable.
And so, 1 year later, Phase 3 would kick off with a movie that still stands as my personal favorite of the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, Captain America: Civil War.
It may not have Avengers in the title, mostly because Thor and Hulk are purposely left out to have their own movie adventure a little later, but to me, this is the movie that makes up for the blunders found in Age of Ultron, and ends up giving audiences one of the best team-up entries of the MCU, even though they're mostly fighting against each other instead of a common enemy. While Civil War may have taken its name from the comic book storyline of the same name, the plot is quite different. Here, our favorite superheroes are forced to make a difficult decision that creates a divide in the team. When faced with the inevitable innocent casualties that occur when saving the world, we see our heroes strongly disagreeing on whether their strengths should be saved until it's absolutely necessary, and only with the approval of the United Nations. This ends up creating a movie-watching experience that's much more narratively satisfying in more ways than one. Since this is a direct sequel to Winter Soldier with the same creative team involved, we also see a continuation and eventual conclusion to the Bucky storyline before the credits roll. And similar to Age of Ultron, we're also introduced to 2 more superheroes, in the form of Black Panther and Spider-Man. Incredibly, even though both characters aren't given much screen time, Spider-Man even less so, both performances are incredible. And already, I knew this would be my favorite interpretation of my favorite superhero. To me, Tom Holland is Peter Parker. It's also worth noting that Thaddeus Ross, last seen in The Incredible Hulk back in Phase 1, also plays a prominent role here.
Looking back, I think Phase 3 is probably my favorite, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. It opened up with what I think is one of the strongest films, and ends with the wall crawler sequel, Spider-Man: Far From Home.
When compared to earlier phases, I would argue that this one is the least uneven. All of the films are well worth watching, and some of them are arguably some of the best in the whole franchise. Both Spider-Man films, Thor Ragnarok, Black Panther, and both Avengers movies are all fantastic, especially if you've been tuned into the evolution of each character. Doctor Strange, Ant-Man and the Wasp, and Captain Marvel, while each entertaining, were a bit middling, but only when compared to the other bangers in this phase. By the time Doctor Strange hit the big screen, the Marvel origin story was a bit too commonplace, and parts of this movie felt a bit overdone. While Ant-Man and the Wasp and Captain Marvel had the unfortunate job of being sandwiched between the Thanos snap cliffhanger and the eventual endgame conclusion. Both are still solid, mostly safe films, and in retrospect, they were clearly just puzzle pieces to fit in so we could all have our epic endgame finale. So ultimately, it was all worth it.
After the surprisingly emotional ending of Avengers Endgame, where I personally found myself more sad about old retired Cap than I was about Tony's heroic sacrifice, Spider-Man: Far From Home would bravely tease the Marvel Multiverse.
This was something very familiar to comic book readers and also to Spider-Man moviegoers, if you saw the incredible Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse animated film. The MCU may not have done it first, but with any luck, this interpretation would be worth the build-up and the wait. Yeah, well, if you know, you know. Phase 4 is where things start feeling off. This would easily be the weakest phase, and unlike previous ones, where it felt like Marvel had some sort of master plan it was moving towards, this is when things started to feel directionless. In a post-Thanos world, where the multiverse idea should have propelled stories forwards, it more so felt like treading water. It opens up with Black Widow, a movie that still feels like it happened too late. Spoilers, I guess, but Black Widow was sacrificed during the whole Thanos time travel thing, and this solo adventure takes place just after Civil War. Now don't get me wrong, Black Widow deserved her own movie, but this just feels like an apology for killing her in a way that has always felt sort of pointless. Just like Gamora, who went the same way.
But hey, at least Peter and his friends stole another Gamora using time travel, so it's okay, I guess.
Anyway, Black Widow the movie is fine. She's surrounded by a pretty strong cast of characters, and at least we did get a solo movie, so part of me is thankful. Just a little salty too. Later that year, Marvel would win me back with Shang-Chi, yet another origin story that managed to feel brand new again. This might be the best movie in this phase, although it's not my personal favorite. But it is a return to the lighthearted fun before Thanos entered the picture and, killed half the cast.
The next film, however, is where things really started to go off the rails. This is where a lot of people began checking out or giving up entirely. I admittedly remember defending this film as trying something bold and new, but honestly, most people were right. This one is just not good.
With Eternals, we have another Guardians of the Galaxy situation on our hands, but unlike that film, most of these previously unknown characters are not all that likable. Kumail Nanjiani and Barry Keogh are notable standouts, but typically talented actors like Angelina Jolie, Salma Hayek, and Kit Harington feel wasted here. Eternals also went out of its way to introduce a few Marvel cult characters like Star Fox, the brother of Thanos, portrayed by Harry Styles of all people, and the MCU version of Blade. None of these threads have since been referenced again, as if Marvel themselves almost want to forget this one exists. But it is worth noting that a Blade movie is still coming, due to hit theaters next year as part of Phase 6.
On the bright side, I didn't have to sit with my Eternals disappointment for long, because 1 month later, the third and as of now, final Spider-Man film would hit theaters, and this one is good.
Anyone tuned into the buzz surrounding this movie prior to its release knew in their hearts this one was going to bring back Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield from their Sony Spidey roles, but it was so much better than we could have ever imagined. Honestly, the best part about this movie is the emotional arcs each villain undergoes, making this one hit a lot harder with its themes of loss and the nature of revenge. The MCU Spidey ends up learning a very important lesson from his older and wizened counterparts, and this movie's ending bravely starts Tom Holland's version back from ground zero, as the loner hero and friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
As a Sam Raimi fan, I'll admit, I enjoyed my time with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But I wanted so much more from Thor: Love and Thunder. Its attempts to mix serious moments with more comedic ones just didn't work. Kind of felt like tonal whiplash.
And maybe it's just a me thing, but director Taika Waititi, who hit it out of the park with Thor Ragnarok, felt off his mark this time around. And maybe it's just a weird coincidence, but this moment where he and Tessa Thompson kind of dunk on the CGI, it just seems to enforce that fact for me.
Does that look real?
In that particular shot, no, actually. it doesn't really.
Phase 4 would also soberly bow out with Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, a movie that almost feels overshadowed by Black Panther actor Chadwick Boseman's surprising and untimely passing. But this movie did ultimately find its footing to deliver an emotionally satisfying experience that acts as a tribute to Boseman, while also introducing a classic Marvel character with Namor that has me interested in Wakanda's future.
Looking back, this feels like the confused era of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. After the conclusion of the Infinity Saga, the end of Iron Man and to an extent Captain America, to a belated swan song with Black Widow, to a cluttered, boring mess with Eternals, to a tonally confusing misstep with Thor: Love and Thunder, I kept thinking, Marvel better get it together. And soon.
And while we're still in the middle of this next phase, and there is some excitement on the horizon, it didn't start off with much hope. Ant-Man and the Wasp in Quantumania is easily the most forgettable entry in the MCU. I'm not normally one to complain about visual effects. As long as it isn't distracting, I'm usually fine with it. But almost every scene in the quantum realm felt like everything happening behind the characters was completely separated. And in reality, it was. The same virtual production stagecraft technology Disney used previously with The Mandalorian was utilized here. But unlike The Mandalorian, it felt noticeable here. Maybe it was the oversaturated colorful backgrounds, but it looked like a mess. And okay, I know, visual effects is a complicated process, with a lot of dedicated and in many cases overworked artists doing their best to keep up with the MCU's aggressive release strategy. But that's part of the problem. Too many movies obviously means much less quality control for every aspect of the creative process. Hence, we have a director awkwardly smiling when it's pointed out to him that something in his movie looks off. And in the case of Quantumania, we have sequences that are almost reminiscent of the Star Wars prequels, where you can tell most of what's located behind the actors is not even there, and it takes you out of the movie. And maybe that's why Quantumania's plot felt similarly messy. I mean, why even give Bill Murray a cameo if he's not going to do anything of note? Like at all. Anyway, a few months later, Guardians of the Galaxy 3 would conclude James Gunn's relationship with Marvel before he would move on over to restart the new DC shared universe. And this movie is good. I would even say it's pretty great. But wow, is it ever depressing. And I know Gunn's specialty is mixing weird humor with emotional moments, but man, this one was almost too much for me. I did enjoy it, but like Avengers Endgame, this felt like another ending, and maybe even the perfect time for me to bow out.
On the TV side of things were a bit more uneven, but I will admit that I did enjoy my time with the Phase 4 series of shows.
I especially loved WandaVision, Loki, and She-Hulk, but none of them were bad. I think every series had a few pacing issues admittedly, with WandaVision and Loki both feeling like they were the perfect length, but I was invested in each character's story from beginning to end. When it came to the new characters including Moon Knight, Ms. Marvel, and She-Hulk, I thought they were all solid additions to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I enjoyed my time with each of these shows. But unlike the movies that came before, I've had zero drive to experience any of these adventures for a second or third time. And I wonder why that is.
And maybe it's just me. Maybe it's a personal thing. Maybe personally I'm done with the cinematic universe. And if it's just me feeling this, then obviously that's okay. But then, 2 months after Guardians of the Galaxy 3, a new phase would kick off with the show Secret Invasion.
And right from the get-go, this one feels sort of phoned in. For the ones who don't know, the opening title sequence for Secret Invasion was created using AI. Now, the studio behind this sequence has since come forward to comment that AI was one of many elements the team used to achieve the distinct otherworldly look, but come on, it looks like AI. And I'm fully aware that AI is a controversial subject, and as a creative, I do struggle with it personally. I believe AI has its place. Like when it comes to generating fake movie trailers like those Wes Anderson versions of Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, those are hilarious. But when it comes to hiring an artist or trying to save time and money by generating something that cobbles together something new from work that may have been stolen, yikes. Anyway, I didn't even finish Secret Invasion. I watched the first episode and walked away. For the comic book readers out there, Secret Invasion is a fantastic interwoven storyline that has major Invasion of the Body Snatchers vibes. But this smaller interpretation with no known Marvel heroes except for our buddies from S.H.I.E.L.D., this ain't it.
And that's where my relationship with the Marvel Cinematic Universe ended.
I haven't even bothered watching Loki Season 2, What If Season 2, or Echo. And you know what? I'm sure they're fine. Some of them may even be great. And I'm sure the Marvels movie was also pretty good. But I just can't anymore.
It might sound silly to say, but I miss the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I miss being excited to go to the theaters to find out what would happen next. I miss standing in line with other uber nerds and making superhero friends.
I miss filling the collectible cups with soda and being bummed out if they didn't have the character topper I wanted. I miss missing out on the Spider-Man popcorn tin that I refused to pay for on eBay. But more than anything, I miss the passionate filmmakers that wanted to make a Marvel movie, to bring a new character to the universe and tease more in the credits. Nowadays, it feels like some of these directors are being hired for a job they don't really want to do, but agree anyway because it will hopefully boost their career and they'd be stupid not to. Obviously, I'm just speculating here, but the perceived lack of artistic stamp on many of these MCU films, outside of a few notables like Black Panther and Guardians of the Galaxy, makes me feel like some of these directors are asked not to fix what isn't broken.
I recently took a look at the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe to see if there's anything on the horizon I might care about.
I mean, the Netflix Daredevil series was awesome, so hopefully that follow-up will be fun. Same goes for the Spider-Man prequel cartoon, and I'll at least watch the trailer for Fantastic Four. Speaking of trailers, what even is the next entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
Okay, Deadpool and Wolverine actually looks amazing. Hugh Jackman kind of looks like he's done with all of this, and I kind of see myself in him. Maybe when Deadpool convinces Wolverine to give it one last try for old time's sake, maybe that's directed to the MCU fans, who just want to have fun at the movies again.
Not cry over animal violence or yawn through tired special effects, but laugh, cheer, and high-five each other over an epic cinematic adventure. It doesn't have to be fine art, it doesn't have to win any Academy Awards, but it should at least make you smile and forget about the confusing universe that seems to be collapsing in on itself. Forget about the controversy surrounding the uncertain future of Avengers 5. Let's just cut loose and have some fun at the movies again.
But let's turn it over to you. Did you follow along with the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Are you still eagerly awaiting each new entry? Are you excited for Deadpool and Wolverine? Or have you since given up and moved on? Let me know down in the comments below, and until next time, I've always wondered, whose brilliant idea was it to seal the mouth of Deadpool in X-Men Origins Wolverine? I mean, you know he's called the Merc with the Mouth, right? Well, at least we get a do-over this time.
Hey, hope you're having a super awesome day. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much, and I'll see you real soon.